All right, assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this program here tonight. Our topic of discussion today is what is solidarity, or why solidarity, and how solidarity. And a few of the conversations that have taken place over the past few months, or actually the past few days, it's been changing constantly. But one of the biggest conversations that we're seeing today is around the idea of immigrant relations in the inner city and what those challenges have looked like. And alhamdulillah, here we have Imam Jihad Safir from Islah LA, Sister Sarah Hamdan from Iman in Chicago. Imam Jihad is the president of Islah, and Sister Sarah is the senior organizer with Iman. And my name is Arbaz, and I'm the president of Sahab Initiative. So some of the conversations over the past few weeks with the killing of George Floyd and really the horrific tragedy the entire country is really just trying to take in have come around. And people are starting to talk about what relations should look like within the inner city. I know there were specific situations with the store owner being of Arab descent and from an immigrant background and serving the inner city. And we don't want to speak too much about that particular situation of what he did, but it's an opportunity for all of us to reflect on our own relationships and what our relationships should look like within that space, and what should we understand. What should we know about the inner city when we're in that space, whether it's through doing business, whether we own a store, or are serving in any other way possible. So alhamdulillah, we have Imam Jihad and Sister Sarah. Here's my first question to you guys, and then inshallah we can kind of dialogue about it. Why the concept of solidarity? What does it mean beyond just being showing solidarity through signing a statement or just voicing it? What is the depth behind it?
Okay. Well, I mean, of course, وَاتَّصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to hold on to the rope together, and do not divide. I think this is important, that for us really to claim this sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also to claim to be people of the Quran. I think we have no choice. It's our obligation to come together. And I think what I'm promoting is the importance of really getting to know each other's narrative, sitting down and beginning to listen to each other. Too many times, for example, I think one of the breakoffs within the relationship between those who've migrated over here and those indigenous to America is this idea of authority that we need to really discuss. This idea of I want to teach you. I want to teach you how I've been oriented, instead of accepting you for who you are. So for example, it's the idea of making a clone. We, I think, as a community have become so ashamed of each other. I believe, like, for me to be able to pray next to someone who has tattoos, right? Who has also the remnants of a life that they lived before accepting Islam. For me, I think that's a beautiful example. But when you go somewhere and they want to change you, instead of worship with you, instead of pray next to you, they want to make you into a clone of them. We have to begin to accept one another. I think true solidarity does not come about until we begin to accept that we have different backgrounds, we have different stories, we're all living human documents, and we need to really sit down and get to learn each other's stories. And this is how we're going to hold on to the rope together, by accepting each other.
And I also think that, with solidarity, because I think solidarity gets thrown around a lot. I think in immigrant spaces, I know in Arab and kind of in other immigrant spaces, it gets kind of thrown around a lot. Sometimes it just it's something easy to be able to tweet out or to post on social media. But I think with solidarity comes responsibility. And I think, and I really see those responsibilities kind of coming up in like two key ways, in recognizing the one responsibility that Arabs and other immigrant groups have, to really no longer be complicit in upholding racist systems that are harmful to Black folks. And I think that happens. I mean, upholding those systems happen in very, very blatant, but also very subtle ways. But I think that a lot of, Arabs and other immigrant groups have been able to, have really been able to benefit off of, their complicity. And I think that the other, key piece around responsibility is recognizing when and where it's absolutely necessary to really call out harmful activities that are directed towards Black folks. And so I think that solidarity. I think solidarity is very much an action, right? It's not just something that that can kind of be thrown out there and that we can just take for granted. But I think that solidarity is something that actually has to be lived, and I think that we have a responsibility for solidarity to really be a verb.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point that you made about immigrant communities understanding what contributes to systematic issues. And I think one of the complex issues within the inner city that we all understand is that you have a community that's practicing Islam and learning Islam within the inner city, but then you have Muslims within that same city that would have stores, for example, that are harming the community, whether that's convenience stores with harmful food, or liquor stores, or smoke shops, or these other things. And from my experience, just being within the inner city and seeing those dynamics, I do see there's a lot of tension between the two communities, and there's a lot of research around that. There's a lot of research around the idea of bridging those two gaps. And from my understanding of the history of the inner city, Arabs are one population, South Asians are one population, but you have had other immigrants within the inner city also that have contributed to that. Maybe Imam Jihad, if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, in the inner city, you do have individuals who migrate here, and they come here, they set up shop in the predominantly African American communities. They open up liquor stores, and you'll see young African American males and also females. They congregate around the liquor store, and really these are individuals who are in pain, and their escape is through the drugs and alcohol. And also, you have individuals who are Muslims. They set up liquor stores and also smoke shops, which provides the paraphernalia that support these habits. So for example, an individual can go into the smoke shop, they can purchase, the papers that they roll the marijuana, and also the cocaine or crack cocaine in, and so on and so forth. And so you have all of these things happening in the inner cities, right? These are food deserts. Also, what set up are these are restaurants that sell very cheap food. That when you look at what takes place in regards to the medical history of African American, the diabetes, the heart disease, so on and so forth. To turn these things into to food deserts, and also places you can go. In some neighborhoods, on every corner, you have the liquor store in the church. The liquor store in the church, and this is unfortunate. What has also began to replace some of these liquor stores are now you have marijuana shops. So people can come in and they call it medicinal marijuana. But this is also, you have in some inner cities where it's lines around the corner to purchase this form of escape from the pain. that takes place being oppressed.
Mm. What are your thoughts about that, Sister Sarah?
Can you repeat your original question again, Brad?
So just some of your thoughts around the dynamics of, you know, immigrants coming into the inner city and opening up their stores and their and businesses, and what does that impact in relationship to the community when there isn't a connection, and also what is the, you know, what is the damage being done to the community as far as what they're selling and what they're contributing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I think, you know, to begin with, the reason I know you reached out was because at Iman we've got this corner store campaign that we've been operating for the last 20 years, and I mean, and I think a lot of folks kind of, especially folks from immigrant communities, I think always have had kind of a lot of questions about, you know, our campaign, kind of its function and all that. And I think for, you know, a lot of folks kind of, they understood it as almost like this cute thing where we were trying to, you know, bring fruits and vegetables into, you know, into corner stores. And while the food piece, as you know, Imam Jihad was just saying, I mean, the food, sort of the local food system, I know at least on the south and west sides of Chicago in many ways is lacking, you know, access to, you know, fresh options, to health options, and that, you know, there's connections there to chronic disease rates and things like that. But I think that at its core, our campaign has always been around racial justice and about recognizing the reality of like the harm and the exploitation that comes, you know, that happens as a result in kind of through, you know, through the environment of these Arab-owned corner stores. And so I think, you know, even like recently in these last few days, as there's been as there's kind of been all this activity happening, you know, across the country and in Chicago, you know, some of our stores, especially on the west side, have been, you know, have been hit. You know, businesses got obviously damaged, but there's been a few vocal corner store owners, you know, that we heard from that, you know, expressed a lot of frustration about, you know, their stores being damaged and kind of what are they going to do and all that. You know, and on one hand, okay, you know, yes, these are, you know, this may be, you know, this is their livelihood. This is how they feed their families. But I think that what it also raises is a question around, you know, how long did you think that you were going to be able to run and operate a store that continued to harm and exploit Black folks? And, you know, how long did you think that you were going to be able to do that without really essentially reaping what you sow? And so, and I say that, you know, as an Arab woman, as a Palestinian woman, as a Muslim woman, again, for me, it goes very much back to that, that issue of responsibility, or in many ways, lack of responsibility, and the complicity that a lot of, Arabs have had in continuing to do harm and not really calling harmful behaviors and practices out.
Mm. What have those conversations been like? You know, what are the response when you start to raise that as an issue? Is there initial resistance? Do they already understand it's an issue, and then this is something they have to do? What does that response look like?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously in the last day or so, I mean, things have kind of been heated. There's a lot of moving pieces right now, and I'll talk a little bit about some of what our immediate response to a lot of this is, in you know, what we're kind of planning to roll out. But I think in the past, because again, we've been doing this work for the past, you know, 20 years around corner stores, and it's looked different over the years. We've taken kind of different strategies, different agitational and organizing approaches to really be able to address this in a really sustainable way, and in a way that is led by folks who are most directly affected. So by Black folks living in the neighborhood. But you know, the response has always been varying. I think that there's some store owners who get it. There's some store owners who see the connection and the opportunity in being locally rooted, right, and being rooted in community and having real authentic relationships, in investing in the neighborhood, in hiring locally, and allowing people to like purchase things off credit. I think that there are those store owners. They do exist, and I think that with them we've been able to probably make the most strides, like with the store at 66th and Morgan, right in Inglewood.
It's Inglewood, Chicago, right?
Yeah. Oh yes, not yes. Inglewood, Chicago, with an E. I think it's an I out there, right? Yeah, I mean that that's a store that over the years we've really been able to make some strides with, because the store owner is one who already has sort of a dignity mind, or a dignity framework that he's operating from. But there's also we encounter a lot of resistance, right, with some who are saying why. And I think that I think that some store owners have had the luxury of being able to just remove themselves, right? See these stores as places where they're able to really to take money, and then at the end of the day go back home, because majority of actually none of our store owners live in the neighborhood, so they all at the end of the day go back to the suburbs, go back to the north side of Chicago, and are able to take their money with them. And so I think one of the agitational questions that I know that I've always asked store owners is, would you send your kids to a store like the one that you're operating? And if the answer is no, that tells you a lot. And so there's been kind of a lot of pushback over the years, from a lot of them feeling like, what's the point? Or, quote unquote, people don't want fresher foods. They're fine with the situation that, the situation the way that it is. There's a lot of, they'll oftentimes store owners will also use the threat of safety, and say, well, my store looks essentially like a jail cell because there's bars on the window and there's bulletproof glass around the register, for my own safety and for the safety of of my employees here. But again, our pushback to that has always been, that's perpetuating a narrative, that's perpetuating a narrative around criminality, that is and that's perpetuating an environment where you're where you're asking for kind of this distress and this tension to happen, and for these activities to take place at your store. And so that's all kind of noise that we've had to, and I don't just mean I don't mean to say noise as if but those are all things that we've had to work through, right? And really kind of meet store owners where they're at, and do that in a way that recognizes challenges that they may face, but really sort of centers the voices of folks in the neighborhood, and centers what it is that they're looking for through a local small business.
So in South LA, for example, right across the street, we have a liquor store that's set up, and you have the big sign that says liquor. And there's and a lot of these liquor stores, they're connected to a religious organization. Some of these people have migrated here, and they get loans from companies that are connected to religious organizations. So you have South LA is, for example, we'll never forget. The murder of Latasha Harlins, who she was killed by a Korean store owner. She's 15 years old. She had a dispute. So I think the problem is a lot of time, when people they migrate here in search of this American dream, and the American dream here is, of course, is having as close proximity as you can to whiteness when you arrive here in America. And, having close proximity to whiteness is that you begin to take on the stereotypes, the biases of whiteness, and of course, when you think about, Black people in the mind of white supremacy, It has been, these black bodies, they're criminals. You have the criminalized black body, the stereotypical thug and gangster. So they're in these neighborhoods, and they don't necessarily respect the humanity of African American. They look at them as just consumers. So it's no problem for them to serve them behind this bulletproof glass without building some type of interpersonal relationship with them and with the community. They don't want to know the struggle of the community. Their main thing is feeding their family, who are, a lot of times living away from the community instead of building that community up. These are products that destroy community. Alcohol destroys community. The Swisher Sweets and the smokes, the items that are used to smoke, drugs and everything else, they destroy communities. A lot of this dollar, what they would say, this dollar Chinese food destroys the health of the community. So I think a lot of times the underlining intention there is for money. These are consumers. They're doing it to themselves. These are not humans. If we don't do it, someone else is going to do it. So we might as well do it. Instead of seeing these individuals as humans who need support, these are human beings who need community. They need to be healthy psychologically and physically. So that's not the goal a lot of times. It's money.
Hmm. Well, what's been the relationship like for you in at Islah between yourself and other maybe Muslim liquor store owners or Arab owned or other just people individually? Have you ever had conversations with them? What's the dynamic like, or even from your community level?
My training now is shifting. I'm realizing the importance of really sitting down, getting to know someone's story and narrative. So I'm more open than now to really speak to them. I think a year, 2 years ago, I have, I've had very, my experience just looking at liquor stores and seeing young brothers like myself who are posted up in front of these liquor stores and being able to watch them deteriorate before my eyes has really hurt my heart. And seeing and to see the amount of liquor stores and the amount of individuals who come down to exploit the community, to see, for example, moles on the outside of a liquor store, which is a few blocks from Islah, and then a few blocks to my right, and then a few blocks to my left, on the same side as Islah, you have another Muslim-owned liquor store. My sentiment in the past was I'm disgusted with these individuals. I don't want to share the same space with them. But now I understand that we'll only progress ahead if we try to build relationships and be able to come from a standpoint of, now we have a relationship. Can I help you in regards to making that shift from a business that destroys communities to social entrepreneurship, to a business that builds up communities?
Mm. Yeah, I mean that is a sad conversation. I think one of the challenges that I've always seen and heard from people is that, in San Bernardino, you might have a couple of Muslims that are doing some good work, serving the community with the food pantry and providing assistance. And if you get deeper down and talk to people in the community, they understand that we're one of the group of Muslims, but there's probably another 20 other Muslims out there that are harming the community. So it's almost as if we're up against ourselves and calling people to good. And the people know this. The people in the community understand the dynamics, and they know that there are Muslims that are doing some good here. But the vast majority, in their eyes, the vast majority of Muslims within their community are doing harm, which is it's very sad, because this isn't PR, this is in the media, this is really direct contact at the community level. Speaking on the topic of transformation, maybe Sister Sarah, if you can talk to us a little bit about the transformation you've seen, starting the conversation, and then what are the gradual steps you've seen stores take to ultimately start becoming part of the community?
Yeah. So So we utilize a lot of the strategies that Imam Jihad just talked about, just in terms of beginning with that relationship building first, because we recognize that if that foundation isn't there, if that trust isn't built, then you're not going to be able to get anywhere. And we also, so we approach our campaign as a community organizing campaign. And so we spend a lot of time on the front end building relationships, and we identify stores that we work with through residents in the neighborhood who identify a store that maybe they typically will go to, that maybe their kids will go to, and that they've kind of just identified as sort of a place that they a place that kind of has opportunity to be able to, that they just want to kind of like do better. And so we have kind of different phases of engagement for these stores. We have a partnership agreement that they sign on to, committing to working towards a set of 10 principles that kind of range from treating everybody who comes into the store with dignity and respect, to offering, fresher, healthier, and locally sourced, when possible, foods, supporting local activities, and hiring local when and where possible. And so we recognize that every store that that we begin to work with kind of comes at a different, it's coming from a different angle, right? And so it is very much about yes, being able to agitate and challenge store owners, but also being able to kind of recognize what their self-interest is. And self-interest, when we use it in organizing, we're talking about, ultimately like what somebody sees as their stake. And so with store owners, sometimes that is a spiritual self-interest, right? That we can, that we work on tapping into, because the majority of store owners that we work with in Chicago, are Arab. Historically, it's been primarily Palestinian, but increasingly we're seeing Yemeni store owners, and all identify as Muslim. And so at one point we even called our campaign Muslim Run, because it was sort of a play on this idea of, as a Muslim, how are you really thinking about how you're operating your store, and how are you thinking about your spiritual self being lived out, and how you're owning and operating your store. And I think I know personally some of the biggest juxtapositions that I've seen have been at these stores where maybe I walk in and there's Quran playing in the background, and then I turn around and the store owner is disrespecting a woman, who's coming in to buy something, or who's throwing out kind of racist slurs at folks walking in. And it's just like that kind of
crazy dynamic.
Yeah. Or they close their doors for Jum'ah, and then, and it's just like all these kind of contradictions that, that happen in these spaces. And so, so there's kind of a lot to obviously work through. But that's why we recognize that, it takes time. And so there's a lot of that kind of like, relational and sort of social and anti-racist work that we're trying to do, and at the moment now beginning to expand with Muslim Arc. But then there's also just kind of like the concrete, like brick and mortar changes. So we've over the years been able to provide stores with incentives, things like baskets to display fruit, shelving, some refrigeration to be able to again bring in fresher, and when and where possible, local options. And we've been able to, work with a few of them around, tax incentives and local grants that are available from local business corporations to, in order to kind of, do like things like facade improvements that might sound like minor, but just a few months ago, before kind of the pandemic, we worked with a store to like redo their front windows. And even just like the change as you're walking down the sidewalk, or the change when you go into the store, and just like the amount of like natural lighting now that a change in windows created, also, creates a different type of atmosphere inside the store, and begins to kind of like break through some of that, some of the kind of environmental, it it sort of breaks through some of the way that the store feels when you walk in there. And so we've and I think another key thing too is we work with our public safety, our street outreach team as well, and make sure that there's connection between store owners and our street outreach team, so that whenever there are issues or or what have you, store owners don't resort to calling the cops, because that was what escalated the situation in Minneapolis at Cup Foods with George Floyd. May Allah have mercy on him. The Arabone store felt that it was appropriate to call the cops in that situation, and knowing full well what it means to call the cops on a Black man or Black woman in America. And so we want to make sure that our stores don't feel like they should jump to that position, and that there are other like transformative justice opportunities to maybe remedy either public safety or other issues.
Okay. So we'll get to that point in a minute. I just want to ask, let's dig a little bit deeper into that transformation process. So the transformation process, do people appreciate it afterwards, or does it hurt their revenue, or is it a risk? What has been that, that incentive after, their stores changed? Do you feel like they're losing business? Do they feel better? Just to motivate some people out there, what are some of those incentives to do that after you transform your store, besides the spiritual benefits, just as far as the incentives of your store and everything like that?
There's the spiritual side that may feel a little bit more intangible, but I think from a very tangible standpoint, if every other store in the neighborhood is kind of operating at that same standard, these types of transformations allow each of these stores to be able to kind of distinguish themselves from the pack. And we have seen that they have, they've helped to kind of expand a customer base. They've helped to also, even just kind of qualitatively, folks feeling like there's a certain level of investment that's being made by the store owner that in many ways I think has kind of more longer term, has more sort of longer term results, right? Where it can be both a direct and indirect way of being able to kind of like really build that relationship between community members and store owners, by store owners making these investments in the store, and then by default then making investment in the community. I think has really sends a certain message out there. In terms of kind of some numbers we've seen, through inventory expansion and things like that. I mean, that is something then that has helped store owners to be able to increase their bottom line, and allow folks to kind of begin to shift how they're seeing their store and the items that they're going to their store to purchase.
It's a good point. I mean, I think one of the conversations we've been always having, and I've been talking to Imam Jihad, is just how do you start beginning these conversations on a larger scale here in Southern California? And I think as you continue these conversations, that's something we're going to have to look at. I mean, I think what happened in Minneapolis, it's a tragedy. I mean, and that conversation really about calling law enforcement in these situations, from both of your perspectives. What have you seen as far as the results of using law enforcement as a way of policing your customers, and what type of impression does it give to the community?
Well, I think there needs to be a shift within the policing system here. I mean, this stuff is long overdue. This has been taking place for since the inception of America. So you have, over policed communities, when these communities, they need more of a community policing model. So I think that the model that's in place right now, there definitely needs to be a shift. Being young, we thought it was normal. We knew that certain neighborhoods you go into, you're going to get pulled over. And we said, oh, don't go over there, you're going to get pulled over. We knew certain times the night, if you're driving around while black, you're going to get pulled over. There's been several times me and my friends, pulled to the side. There'd be a crowd of people, and of course the group of African American males, they're the ones that gets harassed, and it's something that you expect. The new language and the framework of profiling, racial profiling, so on and so forth. That's something, these are recent developments, which is, definitely needed, but this stuff is long overdue. There needs to be a new model of policing. You still have this strain of policing that is not for the community, and I would connect all of these institutions, from the institutions that sell alcohol in the community, to the institutions that sell marijuana now in the community, to the institutions that sell bad food, in the community, to the institutions that over police the people in the community. All of them are connected, and this is what you have. People are fed up. They're tired, and that's what they're saying. They're saying enough is enough. So what you have is the result is corruption, but this is produced from a greater corruption. You have looting, but this is produced from an even greater looting. We don't talk about, what about corporate looting? There was a lot of the corporations have taken money, large loans from the government, and which this money can go into smaller businesses, right? So I think that that what we need to really focus on, there's a cancer in America. You have people who migrate here, for example, what may be tribalism in one land may translate into racism right here in America. So we have these racialized structures that I think there needs to be a major shift in all of these institutions, because they're built off of oppression.
Yeah, it's a powerful point. Within that structure, Sister Sarah, what have you seen as far as community policing within your own community, and the idea of using law enforcement within those spaces?
For the most part, I defer to kind of everything that Imam G had just said. And in terms of kind of, some of what we've seen, in Chicago, I think that over the last few years, there's been, especially since 2017, when Laquan McDonald, the young man who was shot 16 times, there's been sort of a renewed push to figure out sort of other, there's sort of police oversight and accountability camps, and then there's like community policing camps. And so, I think on our end at Amen, we've been kind of trying to figure out what could alternative models look like. I know a lot of our work, since 2016, has also expanded a lot of our sort of street outreach work. And in some ways that, while that's not necessarily a community policing model, I think that that's also in part been sort of a community-based effort to be thinking about what what sort of kind of taking care of one another can look like. And I think that's all I'll say on that.
One of the things I did see, the store in Minneapolis put out a statement and said that they committed to now working only within those community type of intervention models. They're not going to be calling law enforcement until there's a solution to the racial profiling and the police brutality that's been taking place against African Americans, which I think is a bold step for one store to take. And looking back at just seeing the history of the store, they seem to be a lot more integrated in the community and more engaged. But a lot of other stores are not there yet. They don't have any connection to the community. Like you mentioned, they still have the jail cells in the front. They don't have much connection or intervention with the community. But what I'm seeing from the conversations is there's a lot of younger people who are now running these stores and looking for opportunities to change that model that they're in. So what are your suggestions around that? Where should people start when they're thinking about these ideas right now?
Imam Jihad, were you going to say something? You can go ahead.
No.
Okay.
No. Did you, was it aimed at, I don't know who was.
I wanted any one of you guys, you want to.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, sister.
Okay. So one of the places, that folks can start, when it comes to kind of thinking about what these stores could look like and wanting to, and I think recognizing the responsibility that as store owners they may have, and particularly like folks who, feel agitated in this moment, in this really unfortunate and devastating moment that we're in. I think, one place to start is by, I think really is kind of one, doing some individual sort of self-reflection. I think tapping into resources that like Muslim Arc and others have. I think that there's some necessary work that all of us who are not Black need to be doing, in this moment, and really thinking about how we show up. In the world, and how we show up in any spaces that we're in, and particularly for store owners to really be thinking about how they're showing up in that space. Something like that might not be necessary. I was having a conversation today with one of our community leaders who was saying, store owners aren't even necessarily in that frame of mind. They're not even thinking about, they're not thinking about anti-racism. They're not thinking about all these things. But I think that that's also where it's just like, this also has to be, this is also like the responsibility of me as an Arab woman to then, use this moment to also, to call out and call up store owners and others, and to, be thinking about how are we having these conversations within our families, within our, community spaces. I think concretely, one of the things that Iman is working on, again, with Muslim Arc and Masjid al-Ma'un with Imam Makram in Minneapolis, is a curriculum that's aimed at store owners, but we'll also have a train-the-trainer component for folks, again, targeted at store owners, to really be thinking about, what do like de-escalation strategies at stores look like? So again, it's not a situation where cops are called, right off the bat. Especially, when that's not needed at all, when there are other opportunities for, whether it's community policing or for, to intervene in a way that does not, escalate to having the cops come. This curriculum is then will also, be infused with sort of anti-racist strategies, and, to again, be thinking about, because, there's a large component of this that is about like moving hearts and minds. I think what's really, what's really sort of devastating, and, to Imam Jihad's point just a little bit ago, is, a lot of store owners, whether they're coming from Palestine or Yemen or wherever, are coming from situations of like war, occupation, colonization, and then coming, to the US, and, coming into predominantly Black neighborhoods and then perpetuating a lot of that sort of state-sanctioned violence, that systemic racism that maybe they fled from in their home countries. And so where there could be a lot of opportunities to make it, connections between experiences and stories and histories. I think white supremacy has disrupted that, and so and then has pitted us against each other. And I think that Arab and other immigrant groups have kind of fallen for that, right, in their sort of reach towards white supremacy. And so all that to say, I think one concrete thing that folks can do, we are having an online event on Friday. We'll drop the link into the chat box, but that's a place for folks either who are store owners themselves or who have a store that you want to work with, that you want to get more engaged, that you yourself want to be kind of more engaged in thinking about how we can kind of challenge store owners and call store owners out and up to do better. I'd suggest that you join us on Friday.
Yeah, I think for the most part, because there's another side to this. So for example, if we get rid of all the, the liquor stores, they still sell liquor at the Ralph's at the corner. You go into the Ralph's, and this is a bigger corporation now, contributing to this, destruction in the community. So I think, also one of the things in mind is really building these institutions, these, Muslim-ran institutions within the community, which now it becomes, a program, a model that it becomes the antithesis of what the liquor store brings. So while the liquor store brings the, things that, with psychological impacts a community psychologically, and also brings out really negative qualities in the people. Now we're coming and we're building up people psychologically. We're changing their mentality towards a mentality that's healthy for to really produce a healthy family. So I think it's important that at the same time, we have a plan to destroy the agenda of many of these businesses that have on their mind, money, even if it means to destroy the community. We have to have on our mind also to build the people up and to really build our institutions at the same time. So Islah, the plan for Islah is to take over the community, and I'm going to say it loud, and we're going to do it step by step with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we're going to do it by building up people, and building relationships with people. We find that, like our sister Sarah mentioned, we have to, our da'wah is built, really going to the hearts and the minds, and making sure that, first of all, the community feels safe with Islah right there. I mean, we have a presence. They feel safe with our men right in front of the gate, right? We always say when we first moved into that community, one of the neighbors said, "We're happy that the Muslims are here," and they love the Muslims. So we have to make sure we build these institutions, we build our presence. We've seen individuals, I've seen it right before my eyes. I've seen that the liquor store, the young man who frequents the liquor store, he deteriorates right before your eyes. But I've also seen the opposite. Now the young man who used to visit the liquor store now visits the masjid, and he is built up slowly. He finds himself more coherent. He slowly finds himself becoming a father, and a husband first, then a father, and a community, upstanding community member, an upstanding citizen. So we're trying to build people up, and we're focusing on that, on building the organization so we can build the people up.
Yeah, you got a hashtag. Someone put a hashtag out there, said the Muslims are here. So
Alhamdulillah. We put that everywhere. The Muslims are here.
One of the questions that I think a lot of people are asking, and we have a lot of people who want to listen now. They don't want to make judgments. So, from your perspective, Imam Jihad, for the people that are serving within the inner city, the people that have their businesses or doing any other business, what would you say is some education? What would you want to educate them on as far as what they should think about when they're in the inner city, about the dynamics, the people, and what you would suggest they know?
I mean, there's so much to know. I mean, of course, we have to make sure we educate ourselves. For example, when I deal with a young man, right, I'm knowing that just like myself, there's layers of trauma, right? So when he comes into Islah, for example, I'm not going to focus on his tattoos, right? The first thing is I'm happy he made it. You made it, I'm not going to focus on, his speech. The first thing is getting to know who this young man is. I want to know his story. He's a living human document. I want to know his story. The problem is that people do not understand what's taking place now. And I listen to some of our leaders, and I'm not criticizing our leaders, but it's a lack of understanding there. I mean, this dates back to, and this is connected. That's why we say George Floyd, his murder. I mean, this is connected to Emmett Till. We have to connect it to Emmett Till. These are things that have been taking place for years. 400 years of oppression. When we think about the slave master placed in charge of the black family, right? He was in charge of marriage, right? When marriage was illegal, right? And the slave, the one who was enslaved, they were a person who was void of human feelings. They weren't a complete human being, right? You have our young black males, and it's connected to today. During slavery and in Jim Crow, expected to be lovers but not fathers, right? So you have the plantation buck and the plantation stud, right? So as a man, not given access to masculinity, our men are hurting. There's a book that everybody should read by Richard Majors called Cool Pose. One thing that we love Black culture, but a lot of Black culture, a lot of times when we look at the hip hop and so on, and how young Black men, they express themselves, a lot of times this is born out of pain. Cool Pose is that there's so much pain. I look cool, but there's so much pain underneath. I haven't been given access to masculinity, right? I haven't been given access to the ability to offer security and status, even a name and identity to my family. So this goes into the name thing. My people came into Islam, alhamdulillah. My father was able to change his name to Sadiq Safir. I'm not going to say his other name. He might get upset with me, but he was able to change his name. So he gave me a Muslim name. He passed down an Arabic name with meaning, when before he had a name that was, that's passed down from, that was given to him, right? So a name is important. A name is something that's important. Being able to, they described one of the individuals during slavery, and one of the recordings, it said that the male would get out of the way of the whip, right? He would try to avoid the whip so much that because he was abused and oppressed so much that he would get out of the way and pretend as if he don't care when the slave master is going after his own daughter. So we don't speak about the sexual abuse in the community, in the African community, of those who were enslaved. It's some of the features of slavery, the sexual abuse that we don't talk about, right? From this slave breeding, we need to research the slave breeding. and really the demeaning of the men, right? So we can go on and on and on these from the stereotypes that have been passed down that definitely impact the self-esteem. So when I'm in front of people, the first thing I want to show you that I'm a human being, okay, and I want you to respect me for my humanity, because people at one point were not respected for their humanity. I'm not going to go on and on. We can go on and on that topic. I just want people to understand what we have taken place when you see an individual who shows that they've been impacted by oppression. Understand, al fitnatu ashaddu min al qatl. That oppression is worse than killing, right? Than death, right? Is oppression. So Allah mentions this in the Quran.
We have a few questions. Actually, not even a few, a lot of questions, and a lot of comments. I think I'll start with this one. One of them, it says, I think solidarity begins when we can be comfortable visiting each other's masjids, not just stores. Can you speak to that, please? As far as the idea of just even visiting other masjids within our community, within the broader immigrant community, some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think what's important is that when I was working in the prison, one of the inmates was released, and then they came back, and I asked them when they came back. This is recidivism is real heavy. When I asked them, I said, what happened? Did you go out and visit a masjid? They said, yes, I went to the masjid, but no one embraced me. So no more of that. When we come into the masjid, when people come into the masjid that you don't know, it becomes, I think it's a responsibility of hospitality. And we have to make sure that we don't turn our masajid into Walmart, where you come in and it's bigger, it looks better, but there's no hospitality. You just come in, now you get to check out with a machine. And our masajid may be coming like this, where perhaps we're looking for in the future maybe a machine that before we leave, it quotes us a hadith or something. We don't want that. We need real human contact with one another.
So in the context of everything that's taking place in our country, the conversation we're having right now with the immigrant-owned corner stores is one conversation, but it's also a big part of the conversation. Imam Jihad, could you share some of the larger conversations that everyone should be thinking about in this point in time? And how should we move forward? What are the things that we should start thinking about doing differently as a whole, as a society?
This is a window of opportunity that we have to really make substantial, meaningful change, right? That you get windows of opportunity that come, and the window closes. If we as a Muslim community do not make substantial change, then there's going to be issues. So for example, right now we have these 6 points that have went out. And I know communities, there's some apprehension, there's some fear. I don't want to say the wrong thing and everything. Just right now, like for example, on Friday, we need everyone. That message on Friday needs to be a message condemning police brutality, okay? And condemning anti-Blackness, condemning racism of all forms. That's what the message. We don't want to focus on the looters. We want to focus on anti-Blackness within our community and outside of our community. We're talking about individuals, the African-American community, right? Who were on the forefront. This is the reason why our sisters are able to don their khimar in the hood. This is the reason why they're respected. They come back past a group of Black men, and somebody gives them the salams, right? This is the reason why for myself, alhamdulillah, I'm protected. My kufi protects me in the hood. You know what I'm saying? That people were on the front line for us to have names like jihad, and for us to don our names instead of making it an abbreviation or something. So for us, I think we owe something to our brothers and sisters to really show solidarity during this time. This has been way too long. And the racism, see, the problem is if my mind is overseas, right? And many people who have, and I understand it. Of course, if you're from Pakistan, you're going to be concerned about what takes place in Pakistan. If you're from Palestine, you're going to be concerned about what takes place in Palestine. If you're from Syria, you're going to be concerned about what takes place in Syria. But what happens is, if you're not concerned on what takes place in these United States, when you and your children live in the United States, and if you don't make transformational change within the community, the mentality, the toxic mentality outside of the masjid will begin to seep in the masjid and affect the people sitting in the masjid along with their children. So we have to be concerned about what is taking place right here in America.
Do you have any thoughts on Sister Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add is that I think for those of us who are not Black, who are from immigrant backgrounds, in this moment, I think we need to step back, kind of, we've got the responsibility to kind of call each other out, as I mentioned before, but I also think that this is, a moment where we need to take the lead from Black voices, and we need to, be mindful of not trying to grab the mic in these moments. So,
Alhamdulillah. So let's see if we have any other questions here.
Baz, man, you have a talent. You like the Muslim. I don't want to say Geraldo, man, but you got skills.
I don't know who of any of those is a good example on TV. I think this is a important conversation. It's an important conversation that we've probably been having for a really long time. I think we all know the problem of the corner stores and liquor stores within our community, and we don't know exactly what to do about it. I think it's a tension that exists constantly, and I know many of the people that do run the stores, they do want to change, they do want to do something different, but sometimes they don't know where to begin, and sometimes they're also caught on the stigma of that. We have okay, now everyone's asking questions right now. How should we support the effort for this Friday's Day of Outrage?
Okay. So the Day of Outrage, for our imams, we need our imams to, and I have a conversation with imams probably tomorrow. And this is going national, right? So our imams, we're expecting them to deliver their Friday khutbahs, talking or condemning police brutality, anti-Blackness, and condemning all forms of racism. So, and then for those who they have programming on that day is dedicated to condemning these things, right? Condemning anti-Blackness and police brutality and all forms of racism. So that's what that day is for. And then we have a program coming up. It's going to be a very special program in which we're going to announce a new point to our 6 points. So now it'll probably become 7 points on. So we have another ask that we're placing out there for the community on how we can show support for our brothers and sisters during this time. So that's going to be 3 p.m. We need everybody on the Islah LA page, 3 p.m. Alhamdulillah, Rami Nashashibi, he's going to be on, inshallah, for Iman. So we're all partners in this. So we need everybody on the Islah LA page on Friday, 3 p.m. Pacific, and I think that's 6 p.m.
Five.
Eastern.
Five.
5 p.m. in Chicago, of course, you know. But so 3 p.m. Pacific, we need everybody on the Isla LA page.
So we're getting this question a lot. I think Sister Hamdan, a few people have asked you if how could you create better engagement between people in the African American community and immigrant masjids in general. I think they want you to expand your work.
I mean, you know, there's, I think, personal sentiments that I kind of can share around this. I think that there's also, you know, folks that I think are doing some really powerful kind of like, you know, organizing work to really kind of think about what like masjid boards look like and all that, to really be thinking about how sort of from like a systems standpoint, are we really thinking about like what our masajid can look like? But I think that in some of those cases where, you know, Black folks might come into a, you know, a masjid that's primarily, you know, Arab or Desi, and are not, you know, are treated very disrespectfully. I mean, that is, I mean, that's really, I mean, that's unfortunate, and it happens all too frequently. In those cases, I do think, again, it's the responsibility of calling that out then does fall on, you know, on immigrant communities to really to recognize that and to call that out. I know that's not a really good answer. No, but I don't think I necessarily have a good answer for that, because that happens, and I anticipate that that's going to continue to happen.
I think what's important is that you know, we create environments. So our environments need to be needs-based environments. You know, one of the needs that all of us have as human beings is the feeling of competence, right? If I come in the masjid and I'm praying, and you move my hands during prayer, I'm not going to feel like I'm a competent Muslim, right? The feeling of competence and giving people the confidence in themselves that I can do this Islam. I think that's so important, you know, and in all of our religious spaces, we have to learn how to, and this is where training comes in. You know, we have to learn how to build each other up. You know, if a person's performing wudu, if a person, I'll give you an example. Before, you know, when I first started giving the khutbah, right, I would go into certain communities right after, and I would scribe like, people are waiting for me to make a mistake. Right after, I get a crowd of people. You made a mistake on this. Muslims are so good at calling each other out, right? But we need to become experts. We're experts on calling each other out. We now need to become experts on building each other up.
And that's a powerful point to end on. I think this is I think that's the core of this conversation here. I think this has been an elephant in the room. I think, you know, people have wanted this conversation. From the comments I'm seeing here, everyone's like, thank you for bringing up this conversation. This has been something that has been on people's minds. And inshallah, this is something that could really be a springboard for change, because this is the first conversation that we're having here in Southern California. I know we're going to talk within our own communities. We'll connect with Imam Jihad and just start thinking of, you know, practical ways we can start building each other up within our own communities. To build stronger communities, broader communities, people that are powerful in service and bringing change to their community. I thank you all for your work. Jazakallah khair for both of you, for both of the work that you guys are doing. These are critical moments. These are conversations, you know, one of the many conversations that are taking place right now. And we're going to see more of this every single day as more people are frustrated with what's going on. And we're seeing still a lack of response from local police departments, local lawmakers. So as that tension still rises, more of these conversations are going to continue. And inshallah, you know, I urge everyone that's following here to follow the work of Imam Jihad, the action items that he's put out with Islah LA. There's going to be a 7th one on Friday, correct? The 7th one on Friday. They have a whole lot of programs this Friday, and then the following week they're going to be announcing more projects to work on. So I think this is a moment for the greater immigrant community. I think half of the viewers here from the immigrant community, I think it's an opportunity for all of us to reflect on our own communities and reflect on what we want to do differently in this time. Because the worst thing that could happen for us is to take all this information in, know this is happening in the world, and leave our messages the same way, leave our communities the same way. Because then ultimately we're saying that we're not better than the other people out there. We're not better than the others that are continuing bigotry and hatred. We're just allowing it to seep in our communities. It's the people that don't speak up that keep things complicit, keep things the same way. Inshallah, we'll continuously build up each other. May Allah bless all of you, and Jazakallah khair. Wassalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum.